it's not a repeat sprint sport because you're not sprinting every time you run. But sometimes you do have to, and you do have to repeat efforts, and those efforts are interspersed with longer rest periods. Hey buddy, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Excellent. So for the record, just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're after here.
Yeah, all right. I'm a PhD candidate at Leeds Beckett University.
Nice, man.
So we've got I've got an embedded role with the Leeds Rhinos, which is a rugby league team over here. So I'm my role would be like the academy SNC. So, but right now we're kind of don't have academy at the moment just because we're during backup from COVID. So I've just been helping out with the first team, which is good just to get used to the environment and see what things are like, because I don't have a rugby league background myself. I'm originally from Canada. So
where about?
I'm from Toronto.
Cool.
But I've spent some time in Vancouver, and I compete in weightlifting. So I was
cool, man.
in Vancouver for that was 2016 when the Nationals comp was there.
Wait, because I think I did it a little bit before that. It was early. I think it was, did I compete in 14 and 15? I think something like that. So you must have come in right after me. What club did you lift with a club, or were you just independent?
Well, I competed for like Team Ontario, but my
Cool.
club in Toronto is Steel Machine. It's a small club, just my coach, myself, and a couple others. But
cool.
Yeah, that's funny how we've got that in common. Like you spent some time in Canada, done the whole Olympic weightlifting bit, and kind of come around full circle. But man, you posted some wicked stories about Switzerland the other day, and I've been dying to get out there. I will eventually, but it looks
yeah, man, it's honestly it's funny because I was a kid, grew up here, very lucky to grow up here, and then by the time I was done my army service here, I just couldn't see Switzerland. I just didn't want to be here. Took my backpack, went to Australia for 6 months, came back, still didn't want to be here, left again, went to Vancouver. That's where I met my wife, and then stayed there for 7 years before coming back. And man, since I came back, every single day I wake up and I look outside and I'm like, Jesus Christ, this is such an amazing place. It's beautiful. It's stable. It's safe. I mean, I don't know. I could go on and on about that, so I'm going to stop. But yeah, it's a wicked place, man. And you should get your ass here at some point.
Yeah. My cousin was living there for a while. He just moved away from there. He was doing some pharmaceutical stuff, but I just missed him. So I'll have to find another excuse to get over there. So hence me bugging
come visit.
you.
Come visit.
I went to Australia too, actually, because my sister's over there, and I did my master's in Australia. So I was over in Brisbane, Gold Coast area. So common places geographically.
Exactly. A lot of common places.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. So coming from Toronto, once I went over to Australia, I kind of got interested in rugby because being in that end of the world, it's kind of a sport that Australia and New Zealand pretty dominant in. And I just grew an appreciation for them, like just the demands, like coming from playing ice hockey growing up, like, yeah, it's fast paced and everything, but there's collisions involved, but we're wearing full equipment. And then you see these rugby guys playing a full 80 minutes, going like smack head on collisions with each other. And it's just like, and then rugby sevens, like it's completely different beast. But so just from the athletic performance or physical prep demand, like I really admire the feats that they have to overcome. Anyways, that's what triggered the interest. Yeah.
No, it's I think it's a really good point. I think we forget, like, oh, it's our job, we're trying to get the guys and the gals better, but then sometimes it's nice to just sit back and look, just watch. I like to on the weekends, I'm not that involved with the teams at this point. That the coaches, the sports coaches, take the warm-ups. Like they don't need me for 20 minutes of warm-ups. They can do it themselves. But I like to just go down to the pitch and watch. And it's the level that we play at. It's not Super 15 or Six Nations, but just to sit back a little bit, like you said, and appreciate the sport for what it is pretty important at times, I think.
Yeah. And I think like being part of the process, like leading up to game day and like that excitement and then just kind of watching it pan out is kind of cool, just to be able to sit back and enjoy it. And
I agree, man. I agree.
obviously you're still picking up on things, but yeah. Yeah, well, anyways, first I wanted to say thanks for your responsiveness and your willingness to share and all your contributions that you're doing so far. I appreciate it. And
My pleasure, man.
so just, I guess the reason for me kind of reaching out was kind of my own. We can kind of use my scenario as a bit of a case study, but basically it's like this whole idea of basically the struggle I'm dealing with at the moment is like this old school approach of we have to train hard and we have to work the guys and they have to be bagged and they have to be exposed to it and so that they can meet the demands in high pressure situations. But obviously I think there's a smarter way to go about it. And for me, I think getting that across to coaches or supervisors or mentors has been difficult for me. And I think I kind of bring that back on myself, just the fact that, well, if I'm not getting through to them, maybe it's just because I don't understand it well enough to have a deep discussion and create some dialogue. In a combination of they've kind of got this old school mentality of thinking. So anyways, I think I just wanted to have a bit of a conversation. So, and then it can kind of organically grow. So basically we're 20 weeks out from our hypothetical return to competition. So a big prep stage.
Right.
And then initially they're just going to be returning to 2 times a week on field.
Yeah.
And then we've given them a little bit of solo prep that they could be doing beforehand. So
yeah,
I also listened to your podcast with Nick Ward the other day, and bearing that in mind in terms of like the best thing that we can do is hone in on their coachability during the session. So I guess our initial idea for those first 2 sessions that we're actually going to see them is they haven't touched the rugby ball in 6 to 7 months. So it's like, let's get their hands on the ball, rugby skills, they're back with their mates, kind of enjoy it a bit. So from that side of things, I understand that way of thinking of getting them back to rugby because they've been away from it. But then on the other side, it's like red flags. If they're going to be doing some sort of small-sided games, they're going to be doing like XLs, D-cells, exposed to high-speed running demand. So
yeah.
So I just wanted to know, like, I guess what you would think about or what you would prioritize in those first few weeks back, where we've got two sessions with the players a week. They haven't touched. We have no idea what they've been doing for 6 to 7 months. So I'm assuming, from a physical prep perspective, I'm assuming the worst, as in they've done nothing. And some of them may have, some of them may not.
No, but as you should just play the worst scenarios, right?
Yeah. So what would you kind of aim for in those sessions? Like, would you want a designated block for physical prep? Are you happy for them to kind of roll with just getting their hands on the ball for a couple sessions, or yeah, what would your thought process be?
Yeah, so to really like simplify to write down what I've like the simplest I've been able to get it down to in terms of the physical prep demands for rugby, without going into, obviously there's we could cut those categories into subcategories and make it more, more complicated if we wanted to, but I think about speed, contact, and then conditioning as the 3 main aspects of physical prep for rugby. And so from that, I need to, and if we break down each one into 3 phases, the conditioning one, it's a little muggier in terms of defining phases. But for me, the speed has to be broken down into whether you start with power speed drills, or you start with, for guys that potentially haven't done anything for 7 to 8 months. And by the way, I'm recording and I'll post that. So if you want to just listen and then take notes after, it's cool. But go ahead if you want to take notes.
Okay.
I think starting with the safest thing possible in terms of speed work. Still call it speed work, right? You're still gonna, if you can, you're still gonna dedicate. Maybe you don't have time to dedicate in the first session because the coaches want the guys, which again is fair. They haven't touched the ball, and what we did in our return to play this summer, I think we started too late with the ball in hand. So I think for me, you have to touch ball on day one. I mean, my warm up always starts with, kind of a small perimeter, all the guys in there passing in close quarters, just jogging around, and then doing some like side shuffles, ball around the waist, passing. So the first like 5 minutes of everyone's of my warm ups is always with the ball in hand and just essentially just doing some general stuff, getting them to have both hands above their heads and then crouching down and passing. So everything with the ball so that they can kind of just get into it slowly. But that way you get a ball in and the coaches are happy. I guess you could tick that box, right?
Yeah.
In terms of speed over the first, if you guys maybe have not done anything, I would probably go the safer route and say for at least, and you'll have to obviously refine the times for your own situation, but off the top of my head, I'd probably say between 3 and 4 sessions of power speed drills, progressing distances and number of lengths that you do, like 10 meters, then you go to 15 meters, then maybe you extend to 20 meters over a few sessions, and then kind of ramping up the intensity of the drills themselves. Start with easy stuff like A marches and skips and ankle hops, and then slowly move towards maybe kind of uh, snap skips and booms and stuff that are a bit more dynamic, but progressively again, because they're going to need the time to respond to those things. I think so. That would be from a sprinting perspective. I'd probably start with that. You could technically include that in a warm up.
Yeah.
Right? I do power speed, like about 5 minutes of power speed drills and accelerations in every warm up. So you could totally work that in. And I think it's just your job to set strict parameters in terms of what you want them to do and what not to do. Like I have no problem standing in front of the guys, explaining what we're going to do for a minute and repeating 3-4 times in a row. Nobody is running full out. Nobody is running 100%. This is like 80%, 85% max. I won't see nobody going hard. If anybody's getting hurt today going hard, it's on you, and I'm going to punch you in the face after as well. So like, just be really clear. Like this is, we don't want any injuries, right? It's not what we're here for. It's the polar opposite of what our role is in a way. And so we need to really be, we can't leave any wiggle room, in my opinion, on that. So just be really clear with what you expect from the guys. What I did this year that was really, really helpful was I actually planned out the first 5 weeks, 6 weeks of prep that we had, and then made a little presentation, PowerPoint, like keynote, quick and easy, and then recorded myself explaining what we were doing, sent it to all the players, and said, if you have any questions, Monday evening we're doing a Q&A. Just hop on a Zoom call and ask me all your questions. And we got to training on day one, and I was like, questions, no questions, okay, let's run with it. And we just executed the 5-6 weeks as best as we could. There was a few tweaks along the way, but in general, all the guys knew what we were doing and why. That was the most important thing. They knew why we were doing it, and I think that was a big help. Now, I'm lucky to have full buy-in from the sports coaches, which sounds like it's not your case at this point.
I think I would. It's a matter of like educating them so that they understand.
Right, but that has to be done before injuries happen, right? You can't be like trying to, but be like, hey, and then they go do full contact on day one. So I think stressing to them that there is, and going maybe on the contact portion, I said power speed drills for phase one of speed, and then you could do resisted sprints, so with sleds or incline, and then you could go to full on sprints, and then maybe flies and stuff like that down the road. I usually follow that sequence, and allow myself for at least, again, it's hard to say depending on the circumstances, but I think I did 1, 2, 3, 4. I did 4 hill sessions, and then I did 2 or 3 flat, and then I went to flies. So I at least had 4 or 5 weeks before we did any flying work. And we started obviously short, 10 for the backs and fives for the forwards. And then when it comes to the contact, I would use I don't know if you saw the PDFs that I put out on contact prep and grappling. So I would do a phase of contact prep only, starting with, bear crawls, crab crawls, gorilla, all those things. Like, again, you could roll that in the warm up, right? I like to do like a few lines, like 5 or 6 columns, and the guys go in. If you have more guys, you could do 2 blocks of, 5 on one side, 5 on the other. You stand in the middle. They all go up in line and they do their ankle hops, and then you circle back around and they do a bear crawl. Like, you can switch it up. You can mix. I like to mix in the warm up the power speed drills and then the contact prep. And then I would stick with contact prep for at least 3 to 4 sessions before they do any kind of grappling, wrestling type stuff, and then progress to contact. And I think stressing that to the coaches, that if they do any kind of game on day one, you don't, I honestly wouldn't recommend it. One of the things I liked the least, and it's funny because when I was a player, that's one of the things I liked the most, was touch rugby before practice. Right? So the guys roll up half an hour before and they play touch rugby for half an hour, no warm up, no nothing, straight into touch rugby. And then they come to me and they're like, "Oh, my hamstring's a little tight." I'm like, "Yeah, no shit. You just went from like the changing room. You probably sat for 8 hours at a desk and then you rolled in and got changed and then did this and then went to play touch rugby. What do you think is going to happen?" So I think just stressing to the coaches first and foremost that the big break that everybody had is a very big danger on the players' health and the players', availability status. And if they want to have a full squad by the time the season starts, we can't rush any steps. So, playing ball and stuff like that, yes, but we need to set parameters on that, right? We need to set, this, for example, if we were to think of maybe a 5-on-5 situation, I don't know. I wouldn't even want to go there on day one, but as many constraint as you can put on the game, whether it's the size of the pitch, the speed at which they're able to move around, like do like a pass, I don't know how you call it in English, but pass to 10, put 10 against 10 in like a certain perimeter, and or 5-on-5, half have a blue on, half have a red on, and then there's one ball, and the goal is to make 10 passes. Start with something like that. There's ball in hand. They're playing. There's going to be smiles. They're going to be, but there's not a lot of space to run. You can't run with the ball. That might be an easy constraint to apply on a game like that. You can't run with the ball. So you can move around, but then you have to stop, catch, and then pass, and then you can move again. I think that might be a good place to start as a game, maybe even as a warm up for you to just see how everybody's moving and then assess the guys on the fly and see how they're doing. And then, see how much conversation you can have with the coaches prior to, and try to organize that progression and say, look, on the speed and on the contact prep, I need to respect those phases. Otherwise I risk injuring the players. And so you guys need to kind of follow me on that in terms of like, I can't be doing my power speed drills only, and then you guys do like a 7-on-7 on a half pitch and everybody's, bolting 50-meter sprints. That's not cool, because it doesn't jive together. So I think stressing that the speed and the contact prep has to be progressed appropriately in order to reduce injury potential and just to get the guys ready for the demands of it, so that they can have fun doing it and not get hurt. So I'd probably really emphasize those two aspects first and foremost: the speed and then the contact. The conditioning, you got tons of time. So, I mean, in my mind, it wouldn't be a concern. And I probably wouldn't even start with anything structured at the beginning. Just play a little bit, and the guys will, get fitter, just playing pass. Does that answer your question a little bit on how to approach it?
And I think I may be like kind of painting a bad picture a little bit. Like the coaches are quite responsive and they are aware of like the need to kind of wean them back in, but just erring on the side of caution.
Well, sorry, while I have it on my mind, one thing that I did was no cleats on the first 2 sessions. Obviously, if it's really wet and it's dangerous, then sure, they can wear them, but it does increase the force that you can apply into the ground. stepping with them, all that stuff. If you have dry grass or dry pitch, I would recommend runners for the first couple sessions, and then slowly work in the cleats. So like tell the guys, bring both at every session from now on for the next 10 weeks. And what I did was, you know, let's say the session's an hour and a half. The first session they did 15 minutes at the end with their cleats on, and it was just contact prep on the floor, so they weren't running or anything. And then slowly work those back in, because again, just even if it's to avoid, you know, like fucking blisters and stuff like that, it's worth it, because guys haven't worn their cleats in probably 9 months or 6 months or 7 months. And so that's something that has to be considered as well. And again, from a force application standpoint, it does make sense to progressively work those in. That's not from me, that's from JB Marin. So probably a guy worth listening to in the foot and speed kind of department.
Yeah, definitely. In your preseason video, when you kind of reflected on it at the end, you kind of mentioned or alluded to the allotted time you had for prep, and based on moving forward, it would be based on how they felt when they came back. And I was just curious what your observations have been so far based off of like your preseason prep and the time that they've been back now, like how they responded to what you did, I guess.
Yeah. So I think that there wasn't enough intensity in the conditioning towards the end of the prep. One of the factors was that out of the 2 weeks that I wanted to be really hard, so Tuesday, Thursday, 2 of those actually didn't happen because of admin stuff with the club. We had to go to a general meeting on the Thursday when we usually train. That was told 10 days before. I mean, those things shouldn't happen in my mind, but it did. So out of 4 big sessions that we needed to have, in my opinion, to be more ready, we only got 2. So the effect is, as you can, you know, imagine, yes, you get the intensity, but you don't get the accumulation of fatigue and volume, which was kind of one of the intended goals of those 2 kind of peak weeks in the preseason. So in my opinion, that wasn't sufficient. And another thing is, I think we should have done a lot more rugby earlier on. I think the tempos, they're great. They're a great way to progress into harder conditioning. We did start rugby very late, which was not my decision. I like I said, if I had to decide, I would have put rugby in from day one, even if it was 20 minutes at the end, like something. But coaches decided against it. They started pretty late. So we started rugby about 3 weeks out of the first championship game, which is not a lot of time. And it took us a good 2 or 3 weeks in the championship to get our bearings just as a team, you know, just find our, you know, automatism, if that's a word in English, I don't know. It is in French again. And just, you know where you are on the pitch, know how you play together. So it was both, I think it was both on me and on the sports coaches. We started rugby too late. I mean, to their credit, it was it was never in the plan for the guys to be ready on day 1 of championship. That was clear from the coaches. It was like changing staff, COVIDs, like we're going to just roll in and just slowly build up over the course of the championship. So the goal was never on day 1 to be ready. But I think we were a little too unready, if that makes sense. It was we started from a little too far back kind of thing. And on the same token, on my end, I think we should have done more just rugby work for conditioning. So I think the tempos were great. I tried to mix it up towards the end compared to what I did last time. I don't know if you saw with the changing from one interval to the next. Sometimes they were sprinting, sometimes they were doing long tempos, sometimes the front rows were doing a lot of wrestling and grappling, and they appreciated that. But the general consensus was that it could have been a little more intense. And so I think, and I tried my best to kind of use the tempo framework, but make it more intense and make it more reflective of what the game demands. But I do think that we probably would have been better off just doing, 15 on 15 and just playing for 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, with someone in the middle who knows how to kind of lead an opposition, whether it's, blowing the whistle for no reason, giving a 10-meter penalty and forcing people to play quick so that you just get the guys under pressure. I think we could have used a bit more of that towards the end of the prep. So for me, that was missing. So whether it was starting with only one tempo a week plus one integrated fitness rugby session, like a tag where you have to run back to your own try line if you tag someone, and then come back into the game, which creates spaces, and then there's kind of that second defender on the back end as you're coming back. So I think all those games would have been a good addition to the tempo framework. It's kind of one day tempo and then one day integrated fitness, which the coaches would have loved to see, I'm sure. More rugby is always good. But I think in that, just me sitting down with them, and I plan on doing that in December before we kick off in January again, hopefully, is sitting down with the sports coaches and actually devising some games, small-sided games, that we can easily manage and progress and control with a stopwatch, that have easy constraints in terms of rules, and that are going to be reflective of what the guys have to do on the pitch. So maybe, there's maybe 1 week where everybody's together, or maybe if we say we have half an hour for conditioning, maybe 15 minutes is everybody together in small-sided games with certain parameters. And then the next 15 is split backs and forwards. The forwards are doing some kind of pick and go rotation where there's maybe 3 pods of 3, and one pod is defending, 2 pods are advancing, and they're doing kind of pick and goes and stuff like that. And then they do a certain number of them, rest, and then rotate, and then repeat. That's, again, off the top of my head and what I thought about at the end of the preseason. And then the backs would do something that's more on the legs and more running, and maybe a kicking game. A 2-on-2 with a wide space, and they have to kick and catch and kick again, sprint, or kick and chase, something like that. Something with the ball, something more rugby-like, I think would have been more beneficial. And I think if we had done that from the start, or maybe early on at least, we would have been more ready on day one, even barring the rugby side of things, because we would have gotten a bit in the red in a rugby environment. I'm sure it's possible to devise some conditioning sessions that are not rugby, but that feel exactly like rugby. I haven't cracked that code yet. And honestly, I'd rather they play, because at the end of the game, that's what's going to, make them better, is play the game. So I think if they can get a bit more of that, that would be better. And now we're good. Now we're up to speed. Last game, well, this last weekend got canceled because of COVID. Next weekend is canceled because of COVID. But we're doing a training camp this coming weekend, so that's a good, replacement for a game, at least that. But I guess 2 weekends back, we won the game at the 82nd minute, which, I mean, in my mind, it might be wrong, but in my mind, it means we're not too bad physically. If we can win a game at the, keep pushing in the last 10 minutes and score a try and then convert it and win by 2 points, it means at least, mentally we're there, which in my mind is an extension from the physical preparedness. If they're ready physically, then they can actually push mentally a little bit farther. They maybe would have given up earlier, or, flipped the switch earlier if they weren't. So in my mind, that was a good, representation of fitness. The previous game was good as well. The 2 games prior to that, honestly, we had just no team on the pitch. Like, we didn't know how to defend. We didn't know how to attack. So we got eaten on the first game and then lost the second game, which we shouldn't have, but we did. And now we're, I think, up to speed. But it's 2 games too late, right? And then from the rugby side, again, I don't know. But on the fitness side, in my mind, we could have been ready a little bit earlier by doing what I just outlined before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think it's all an experiment and like a learning process. Like,
It is, man. It's on it constantly, yeah.
And I think like we do everything we can from a physical prep standpoint in terms of making sure that they're physically prepared. But I think as well as anybody that there's a difference between being like gym fit or running fit and game fit. Just a different level of intensity and different demands. So it makes sense to try and incorporate some rugby specific work within that prep period.
Mm. We did. Sorry to cut you off. We did
Sorry.
2 friendly games in the preseason before the season started, but it was shit weather and it was against French teams, and it's not like a completely different kind of rugby, but they're a lot more aggressive. So it was heavy on contact and in the front, but it was shitty weather, so there wasn't a lot of running and passing. So in my mind, I think we would have been better off organizing. We have 2 senior teams, uh, A and B, so I think we would have been better off doing an A versus B a couple weekends in a row just to get again that game fitness in. I think in my mind, 2 to 3 80-minute oppositions of some kind, uh, so that by game one we've already played kind of 3 games. If you see what I
Mm.
mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think in my mind that makes sense as a kind of like this number of how much we need to play before we're ready to play. If that makes sense. I, the more I think about it, the more it seems unrealistic to not do any games, not do any rugby, and then show up on day one of a rugby game and then be ready for the said rugby game. You you got to play before. So again, whether it's small sided games or full games, but the guys need some way of finding their bearings and some way of uh, finding their game fitness again. And yeah, so tempos are great, but I do think that we need that extra little mileage in a rugby framework to really squeeze everything. Sorry, I interrupted
Yeah.
your train of thought.
No, not at all. I think just kind of diving on that a little bit deeper in terms of preparing them from a conditioning point of view. Um, I think like you've kind of highlighted the importance of laying down the foundation in terms of making sure that they've got some mitochondrial density so that they can efficiently utilize and without just slapping them with a bunch of work. And then I'm aware of like the limiters that you've kind of outlined being like the brain, the respiratory, circulation, and the muscle.
Mm.
Um, but in terms of like, what do you, I just struggle to wrap my head around the tempos and how it's an aerobic in nature, just because of the low level intensity. I understand that they're kind of low cost, high reward in the sense that we can accumulate some high speed meters and um, without feeling like we're absolutely exhausted.
Mm.
Um, could you explain the the tempos from, I guess, the addressing the limiters point of view?
Yeah, so from an energetic standpoint, then
Yeah.
yeah. So uh, I won't speak on the limiters specifically because I don't think that it necessarily applies in the rugby context, at least not maybe not at all, honestly. Um, it's we were talking about this with Evan, and we're going to do a follow-up video on this, a little collaboration to talk about the applicability of limiting systems in different sports, because you have
Mm.
your kind of VO2 max, which is representative of your maximum cyclical capacity, integrated capacity of all systems, if you will. But then you have your sport specific capacity, which is always going to be lower. It's always going to be lower or equal to, right? If you're in a purely cyclical sport, like maybe cross country skiing, VO2
Right.
max is highly correlated to, performance. But then
Right.
as soon as you add a skill in there, like biathlon is not correlated, like performances are not correlated to VO2 max because now you have to shoot a gun on top
Mm.
of, being fast on skis. And the skill of shooting the gun has nothing to do with your VO2 max. And I think rugby has so many technical components and so many tactical components that just targeting the physiology itself and trying to push your physiology to the limit in an absolute setting doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
Mm.
And that's one thing we'll touch on with Evan is in what sport and what context or what kind of sport is it worth actually chasing your limiters versus actually just get better at the fucking sport,
Right.
because you can push your physiology all you want. You can gain 3 milliliters per kilo uh, per minute on your VO2 max. What is that going to show on the pitch in any meaningful way? No. So I think it's got to be put in context, right? they're interesting concepts, and I think they can certainly be applied in some way to athletes that you work with if you have the time and the resources to assess those things. To come back on your tempo question, um, and it's interesting now thinking about tempos from more of that oxygen flux kind of perspective. For me, it's their submaximal repeat desaturation intervals. So you're using oxygen and then you're letting it go back up to 100%. You're using it up again and then putting it back up, which is it's in essence the game of rugby, right? It's an interval sport. It's an intermittent sport, not necessarily all sprinting. Far from it. Um, it's not a repeat sprint sport because you're not sprinting every time you run. Um, but sometimes you do have to, and you do have to repeat efforts, and those efforts are interspersed with longer rest periods. So I think I think the tempos on a very basic way, they just mimic what the game's going to feel like, you know, at the most base level, and then building that base, layered that with speed work, with contact, all those things, then allows you to have the, if you want to use a CrossFit term, the engine to be able to just cope with the game, right? So I think, and I have to dig more into that, and I want to pop a moxie on someone doing those, those. I haven't had a chance yet. I got the moxie after we finished the preseason, but as soon as I get a chance, I'm popping a moxie on one of my guys when they're doing their tempos, and then trying to get more information on what's actually going on, right? And yeah, I'm just off the top of my head, what are you going to see is SMO2 going down and then going back up, and probably going a little bit above baseline every time until you reach a good kind of high saturation level on all intervals, which it's kind of, yeah, it's just submaximal intervals with full recovery. It's really that simple, I think. um, Again, I want to dig more into that, and I might be wrong on my kind of off the top of my head assessment, but yeah, I don't think we should look much farther than that. I think, yeah, they're a very low cost way of getting conditioning in, especially at the beginning, like progressing with a few easy tempos at the start. I think makes a lot of sense because you get the guys running, but you control the speed, you control the volume exactly. You can add some push-ups, you can add some bear crawls. Like I did a bit of that this year, where after the runs they would kind of all rotate between maybe push-ups and abs and some bear crawls, just to, it's general work, right? I think it's general work, and they're running. And I do think that and that's not necessarily exclusive to tempo runs, but just the idea of paying attention to how you run while you run has a lot of value, right? If we talk about your posture when running, relaxation, rhythm, all those like kind of fluidity of the movements, uh, all those things matter. And if you can work them at submaximal speeds, then when push the beast a little bit, then things are going to run a little bit smoother. So I think from that standpoint, it makes a lot of sense too. But again, you can do it with other running protocols, right? Like personally, every time the guys ran an interval or every two, I'd be telling them what to think about, right? So whether it's be light on your feet, or think about your rhythm, or like free your shoulders up, uh, just basic things like that you can cue in the power speed drills in sprints. But then again, they're not sprinters, so you can't cue someone on a 100% sprint. You got to do that at some maximal speeds and then try to transfer it over to the higher speed stuff, I think, at least with people that are not specialists in sprinting. And so doing all that in the warm up, doing that in the tempos is all quality work, right? It's qualitative, it's not quantitative. And so it may be harder to assess, but I do think that both have to go hand in hand. You can't just work on the quantitative. Like you listen to Nick and I talk about this. So like he was saying, it's a two-pronged approach every time. It's about quality and quantity as well, and intensity, right? But you have to have your eye on both. And yeah, I think tempos kind of cover both those sides quite well. And if you combine that to sprints, well progressed, good volume, etc., then I think it's a good recipe to be in a really good spot to feel good on a pitch.
Yeah, it's almost like we want to expose them to either spectrum where we're like super max speed and then kind of that low end. And then the middle bit is like rugby taking care of that middle bit.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I think that that makes sense and kind of answers where my head has been at. So,
Cool.
yeah, I appreciate your time.
No, it's a pleasure, man. No problem at all.
I'll keep in touch and keep watching your content and yeah, it's good.
Cool, man. Well, if you ever want to do another one of those down the road, to update me on how everything is going, maybe halfway through your 20 weeks, just let me know.
Sure. Okay, that sounds good. Thanks a lot, Sean.
All right, take care.